Cars have advanced significantly in the last 10 years, and within these advancements, there are features or things that we really like, and then things we really dislike about modern cars. And in today's video, I want to share with you some of the things we really like and a brief description of how they work, and the things we really do not like about modern cars and a brief description of how they work right after this. And the first thing on our list of things we love about modern cars, backup cameras. See, this used to be exclusive to like luxury cars and very expensive cars. Very simple concept. You put the car in reverse. You see the image behind you from a little camera that usually sits somewhere in the back of the car that shows you what's behind you. Leaving alone the safety factor of having somebody very short, like a child, behind the car and you not seeing them, it is one of the coolest features that many older drivers will say people are dependent on. But you know what? There is nothing better than you seeing exactly what's behind your car than looking behind you, because you will have blind spots. But here's something about backup cameras that you actually may not be aware of. Beginning May 1st, 2018, it is actually mandated in the United States that all cars sold from that date onwards, new, should have a backup camera. Now, there are some exceptions, and the reason we are able to have backup cameras is because cars have gotten infotainment screens now. In the past, that was not possible. They used to put it in the rearview mirror, some of them didn't really have them, or only on the higher trims. But today, all cars have a backup camera. The way they work is extremely simple. You just have the camera in the back. It is connected to the infotainment system. Every time you put your car in reverse, the computer sends a signal to the radio that we are in reverse and immediately switches over to the input from the camera. Very simple system, usually very reliable and very useful. The second one is electronic parking brakes. Some will disagree, and some, I mean one very important person, Scotty Kilmer, disagrees, but hear me out here. In the past, you used to have mechanical parking brakes. Here's what usually happens with those, and from my experience working in a shop. People will not use them for the first 15, 20 years of owning the car. Then one day they'll use it, it'll get stuck, and that's usually the case. They'll tow the car here, and we'll figure it out, or they don't work when they need them. Folks, let's just reiterate one thing about parking brakes. You should always use your parking brake. Hence the reason why they're not called emergency brake. Yes, they can be used, but you are hoping not to have an emergency where we need to use that brake as the brake for the car, but they're parking brakes. If you park on any incline, or even not an incline, you do not want to rest the entire weight of the car on the parking pole, which is the part this small that is strong, but don't push the limits. That is a part inside the transmission, and if you damage it because you extensively park the car on it or an incline or decline, it's just not worth it. But here's what happened. Modern cars are having more and more electronic parking brake, where in 2024, almost every car has electronic parking brake. And how that works is, instead of having a mechanical shoe that comes out and then they rust, or if you don't use them, they seize, and every time you service the brakes, they're in the way, and you have to... We don't have that anymore. We just have the rear caliper, which is part of the brakes. That's what brakes. You have a little motor that every time you put the car in park, in some manufacturers, they're automatic. The motor will push the piston of the caliper, engage the rear brakes, and now you have it. And in the case of Toyota, this is what our channel usually focuses on. They have a mode that is automatic. Every time you put it in park, it automatically engages the parking brake. But here's what they actually do. When you do that, it'll hold the brakes for a moment, apply it, then let it go. And the reason for that is they don't want the car to roll while the parking brake is engaging. They want it to stay on the parking brake, not on the parking pole. And that is the cool thing here. Now, if you're not familiar, if you own a Toyota and yours is not doing it automatically, it's super simple. You get in the car, start it, put your foot on the brake, apply the parking brake, which by pulling it up, and continue to hold it. You'll get a message that says automatic parking brake is engaged. If you want to disable it, you don't want it to engage automatically and disengage automatically, push it down and hold it and that'll disable it. And in case you don't want it to apply automatically for whichever reason, you can do that. That is one of the coolest features. Now, something I have to say, and this is why Scotty Kilmer does not like electronic parking brakes. It does add a little bit to service. It doesn't add a lot. I have a video right here for Toyota and Lexus how to retract that motor when you're doing service on the rear brakes, because you have to do that. But it makes life so much simpler for service when you don't have to deal with the seizing and freezing, parking brakes and cables and all this complication. All you have is a button, and the best part is when they're automatic. And the third feature we love, although it adds a lot of complication, and I have to say the truth, adaptive cruise control or radar cruise control. Folks, in the olden days, or I would say olden days, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you engage your cruise control, it holds the throttle, and you keep going. If somebody jumps in front of you, you got to slam the brakes or disengage it, or you got to react. But the thing about adaptive cruise controls is, in case you're not familiar with what that is, the car uses a radar sensor that looks at the distance of the car in front of you. And when the car in front of you slows down, it's going to maintain a set distance, and it's going to apply the brakes and keep following that car. When that car gets out of your way, it resumes the set speed. Now, if you are a person that takes long trips, you may not be using it all the time, but it's nice when your legs cramping, you need to move around, and you need to kind of relax, focus on only steering and looking. You still have to supervise these systems, but it made long travel really nice. And with the technology and how things have gotten, they work really well. They're very accurate. And with that came kind of a slew of other, like lane keep assist, like lane trace and whatnot, that keeps you in the middle of your lane. They are nice features. Not when you're driving around town, because I see folks engage them all the time, and they're really not meant for that. But driving on highway long distance, they are really helpful, and is a feature we really like. However, it does add complication. Usually the system has an entire network of sensors. They usually have a radar sensor in the front. Any hit, that sensor gets damaged, and you need to calibrate it. It needs to stay calibrated so it knows how far are you from the car in front of you accurately. So that's the only downside. But to me personally, as long as obviously cars will get damaged when you get in an accident, but otherwise they're maintenance free. They usually don't have issue, at least in Toyota and Lexus, unless we get an accident. So it's a feature we really like. It makes long-term travel really nice and comfortable. And the next one is brake hold or automatic hold, or every manufacturer will call it a different thing. Brake hold, here's the basic premise of that. You stop at a traffic light. Your foot's on the brake, you're waiting for the light. Brake hold will hold the brakes for you so you can relax. And then when we get going, you just press the gas and it gets going. It is an extremely simple system that I always wondered, why couldn't they do it long time ago? Because all it does is it applies brake pressure and uses the ABS actuator to hold the brake pressure, which is something ABS systems were able to do in the past. But it's just a matter of figuring out the software, and they finally was like, wait, why don't we just do this? That's one of those things. Brake hold actually adds nothing of complication other than a light and a switch to activate it and disactivate it. Now, you don't have to activate it every time, but once you turn on the system via the switch, it's on and it's active, and it actually adds nothing of complication. You already have brakes, you already have a hydraulic system, you already have the ABS. All it is software to hold the brakes while you are stopped at a red light, so you can relax, get ready, focus. Especially, and some folks will say, well, what kind of lazy driver are you? Can't you just hold the brakes? Think of our seniors. Your dad, your mom, my dad, my mom. Senior citizens actually love this feature because as you get older, your knees will start hurting. Your body is not the same as it once used to be. So having a feature like that gives your body a break, gives your knees a break. I see this all the time with seniors. Once they learn how to use it, it's really actually helpful, because sometimes they end up putting the car in park just to rest their knees because they're standing in traffic holding the brakes. So that is a really cool feature. And the coolest thing about it is it doesn't add any complication to the car. because there's components that it needs to work, they're already there. It just got utilized better. And the last one of the things we like, and it's really not a feature, it's kind of a thing with cars. Have you noticed that lately modern cars are getting more and more stable? And that is something that all manufacturers are after these days. See, there is a downside to the kind of the trend, and I have to say something, automotive journalists and kind of the whole press pool have something to do with it. Do you notice that all cars are heading towards becoming sports cars and sporty and cool? That's because the automotive journalists, they drive one sports car on the racetrack and they want every little Camry and minivan to drive like that. But as a side effect of that, manufacturers are moving towards making their cars interesting and kind of driving dynamics. But you know what the side effect of that is? A good one. Cars are becoming more stable. I don't know who is old enough to remember, but if you do remember cars from the past, they were scary. Speed limit in the US in some states goes up to 80 miles an hour. You used to drive them at 65, 70, which seems to be the most speed limit across the country. They were scary at that speed. It feels like you're just, if you deploy your wings, the car will just take off. That's not the case anymore. You drive your car at 60 miles an hour, it feels very stable and confidence inspiring. Now, the bad side effect of that, some people will push their cars beyond the limit because they are stable. Don't fall for that. That's the most important thing. Stay with the speed limit, keep things safe for me and for you, because we all share the same road. But it is nice that you are cruising with your family using that beautiful radar cruise control at speed limit 65, 70 miles an hour, and the car doesn't feel like it's about to take off. It feels stable, you can relax, you can focus on driving, and just enjoy your trip. Most new cars are turning that way. We see it in the suspension designs and kind of the overall direction of the car designs, and it's something we really welcome, we love. And by the way, they are not adding complication to the car. Yes, some of the rear suspensions have gotten a little bit more complicated than the ways of the past. For example, now most cars will have multi-arm suspension. You'll see very few cars that have a beam suspension, which is very simple and rugged but not good for handling. That is really nice direction that the automotive industry is heading towards, making cars more stable. Now let's talk about some modern car features that we really dislike. We've been reviewing cars. In case you haven't seen that, we do have a second channel. We review cars from all manufacturers, not just Toyota and Lexus. And through it all, I'm seeing some things that just I wish they would discard and move on from. The silly shifters. I mean, when we had the shifter back in the day, when we had the shifter 3 on the tree and whatnot, when we had the shifter on the steering column, they were okay. You know, they made more space and there's one more lever. Then they moved to the floor shifters. They're okay with those too. I mean, the less complicated something that's very basic needs to be, the better. Then we started with the electronic shifters. Folks, you do not know the level of complication that needs to happen for this electronic shifter that's every journalist loves and every car owner doesn't like. The complication is just unbelievable. So in the normal cars that have a normal mechanical shifter that you just put it in drive and we go, there's a cable that goes from the shifter to the transmission, mechanically changes a little lever that changes a valve that makes the shift happen, and we're good. Well, we can't do that with these electronic shifters. Buttons, rotary dial, or a little knob or something. They had to put an electronic motor that mimics what the old school shifter used to do, and it basically does exactly the same thing except it's a motor. So that's one more component that could go south, and it achieves absolutely nothing. Let me just say that one more time. I mean, we've even seen manufacturers, they have the cable, and the cable runs all the way in the middle of the car, and then they have an actuator there instead of just connecting into the actual shifter. Now, the manufacturers and the press pool, accordingly, they say this frees up more space in the interior of the car. I'm sorry, but can we make that mechanical shifter smaller? Because really all it does is just a lever that moves a cable. We could make it smaller. We can put it in a different spot if we really must empty the space in the middle. But they don't do that. But what's worse is we talked a little bit about how cars are becoming more sporty with things we like, where they're becoming more stable. That's a good part about it. But the bad part about that is every other car, every other minivan and everything, they have paddle shifters because that's something that supercars started. But supercars, they need that because we have a double clutch transmission and you're going to take this car racing and you need to shift quickly. But I'm sorry, a minivan that is a hybrid does not need paddle shifters in its sport trim. All this stuff that they're adding to these cars are adding to their cost. Cars are already very expensive in 2024, and it's these little silly features that contribute to adding more and more and more to this price of the car. And then if your battery dies, you have to go through this entire hurdle to get it out of park. But some of them, wait, we don't want to do that. We're going to add a second battery to only power the shifter. It's like, well, why don't we just put a regular shifter? Does anybody ever complain about the regular shifter? I don't. I love them. They're simple. It's a cable. Car dies, you can't take it out of park or whatever, just push the lock release and put it in neutral and you can push it. Some things just don't need to get complicated for the sake of cool. That is one of them. The next one is electronic door handles. And namely, Lexus electronic door handles. I just have to say it. Pretty sure there are other manufacturers that are doing this, but they are ones that are surprised me because Lexus usually are sensible and don't do stuff like that. So the basic premise of that is your door doesn't have a handle. It just has a button, you press it, and the door opens. And the idea of that is when you're sitting inside the car and you're about to open the door, if there is somebody passing, a car, bicyclist, pedestrian, whatever the case may be, the car won't allow you to open the door. It'll beep, so you wouldn't hit your car. Now that sounds great. Look, I'm all for safety and it's great. But the problem is the level of complication that we had to add to make sure people are paying even less attention to their surroundings. I mean, I'm sorry, if you're opening a door, you should look before you open the door. That would be ideal. But the level of complication, here's what the biggest problem is. This is one of the very frequent calls now we're getting at the shop asking about this. My battery is dead. How do I open the door? So I can open the hood or the back so I can jump start my car so I can get going. Exactly. It's in the owner's manual, some will say. Well, the problem is the owner's manual is usually inside the car. So how are you going to open the car to get to the owner's manual to learn how to open the door? You see how that is? And I almost can guarantee you 105% of people that buy these cars that have this electronic e-latch or e-handle, they do not really understand what to do in an emergency, and they will not read the owner's manual. Nobody reads the owner's manual of cars, which I think they should learn a lot about it, but nobody does, and that's the truth. But the level of complication that needed to happen for that e-latch to happen, so we would not look before we open the door, is totally unnecessary. It just adds a lot cost to the car, and for a feature that I hope in the future is reliable, but it has everything for it to not be. The next one is the infotainment system. We already talked about how backup cameras are great, and they are really great for safety because that's an area, even if you look, you can't really see, especially if you have a high SUV or whatnot. But the infotainment systems. Initially, they started nice. We have Bluetooth connectivity, so you can do hands-free calling, which is safer. You have some more amenities. You can connect your phone and listen to music, then come Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and all that is great. But here's the problem. When we start integrating the core functions of the car inside the screen, so your HVAC, all your features, and now we're going after a minimalist look for some manufacturers. So everything is going in the screen. So my question to the manufacturers is, and to the 1% of folks in the planet that like that, what's going to happen when that screen goes out? I mean, it's a screen run by a software. If the screen doesn't go out, what about the software? What if the software freezes? And it's very common to do that in modern cars because there's simply too much going on in this screen, and usually the softwares are terrible. How are you going to turn on your HVAC? And then the level of complication that have to happen for the integration between the HVAC system and the infotainment system, and usually they're incompatible, and all this complication needs to happen just for the sake of having this cool screen do all that. I completely don't understand that. I mean, in most cars that have this, some of them are at least well thought out, but still, in the cars that are not well thought out, which is the majority, it's a two-step process just for me to change the temperature, or change where the air is coming from, or change the fan speed, and adding to a lot more distraction and a lot more complication. And then what if things go south? Screen stops working. That's it. There's nothing you can do. You are forced. Some of these screens are ridiculously priced because they're a computer. They have a lot going on in them. And when something goes out, you are forced with a very high bill, because otherwise you can't use half your car. That's the problem. And the next one is tied kind of to the infotainment system. Driver monitor. We're seeing this become a trend, especially with luxury cars, and before you know it, it'll trickle down to everything else. So an infrared camera watches your face. Every time you just so much as sneeze, it'll start beeping at you. You're not watching the road. You're not watching the road. Well, here's the problem. If you are a distracted driver, this will be great, because every time you're on your phone texting when you're driving, it's going to beep at you and remind you, hey, you ought to watch the road. But are we encouraging that? That's the problem. I see a very confusing message with that. You should pay attention. You don't need the car to remind you to pay attention. Please, we all share the road. You got to pay attention when you're driving. That's the first thing. The second thing is, usually, normal drivers who are not distracted will be distracted by the infotainment systems that are very complicated, and we need to operate half the car through the infotainment system, mainly the HVAC, that this thing will constantly be beeping at you until you either shut it off because you're tired of it, or you just ignore it, and it's like, you paid for this feature, because some of these features are becoming standard in cars, which adds a lot more. You have the infrared camera and all the software, the computers that run it, and then you turn it off. I don't get it. I think there is a point where safety systems become too much, and that is a prime example of that. And last, but definitely not least, we actually in this case saved the best for last. Two things. Start-stop technology, cylinder deactivation. I will give you 2 seconds to enjoy the comments about these two. I mean, I understand we're trying to save the environment, make cars better emissions, all this stuff. That's perfectly fine. But the problem with start-stop technology is it is extremely just unnatural to drivers. And it doesn't damage the engine per se, but it does put a strain on the starter. That's why most of them, they actually have an interval where you have to replace the starter. Majority of people, I am yet to see one person that tells me, I like start-stop technology. And most people end up turning them off. It's a feature you paid for, raise the price of the car for emissions, and then you turn it off every time. So what's the point? And then the other thing is, the level of complication that had to happen for the start-stop technology is immense. We're not going to go into detail. I did have a video detailing how the system worked and the level of complication that had to happen. I'll leave that right here, but completely unnecessary. And then cylinder deactivation. I just want you to pause this video, go on Google, write cylinder deactivation problems, and the rest is history. Every single engine that I've had cylinder deactivation have had severe problems direct to the engine, one way, shape, or form. Now, here's the problem. We have a V8. Instead of making this V8 more efficient, which is impossible, or making a smaller engine, which is sad, but we have to move on with times, let's make the V8 a 4-cylinder and just half the engine will just be dead weight going up and down. What a marvelous idea that is. I'm sorry, if you are in the market to buy a car with a V8, here's the first thing you need to know. It will never get good gas mileage. It's just simple math. There's no way around it. There are some more efficient than others, but there's no way around it. If you want an efficient car, buy the car with the smallest engine, possibly a hybrid or something or another, but you will never get good gas mileage out of the big V8. It's just not going to happen. And I noticed another thing. The ones with cylinder deactivation, they don't exactly get a lot better gas mileage than their predecessors. Maybe they get one, maybe half a mile per gallon in the real world, and then add all that complication. It absolutely makes no sense. Same thing with start-stop when you can cancel it immediately. Folks, modern cars are the way of the future. And we're talking about mainly gas, and we're not even into electric cars and all that stuff, but cars are heading into an interesting direction. Some of the features we really appreciate and we really like, and they're nice. And you know, looking back, I wish we had them 20 years ago. It would have been so nice. But some features are just completely unnecessary. And if you wonder why the car prices are going up, now it's not only because of the gizmos and the features that they have. Inflation. Everything is becoming more expensive. Same with cars. It's a product made of a lot of other materials. Those materials are becoming more expensive. It's as simple as that. However, there's a lot of technology in cars. And the more technology the consumers demand from these cars, the more expensive they will get. And then the same consumers that wanted these features will start complaining, it's too expensive. That's the truth. Folks, some of the journalist community do have something to do with that. And I am on the border, if I want to call myself that. I mean, I do review cars on the other channel, but I wish everybody starts listening to the people that actually buy the cars, not to just the journalists and what they're saying about it. Because people who ultimately buy the car should voice their opinion about features that are good, features that are not good. So the auto manufacturers, which they do listen, but they just don't know who to listen to. So they can make changes effectively. Get rid of those HVAC controls on the screen. Just put buttons. Makes life much easier, and nobody has complained that there's too many buttons in a car. Because some buttons are simple. You want to change the fan speed? You don't even have to look. You just reach out, change it, and we're done. Don't have to go through 7 menus just to do that. That's just my humble 2 cents. I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And you have yourself a wonderful day.